Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. As always, I am here, Cullen McFader, with my lovely co-host. What would you called me last time? Fantabulous or something? So I have to come up with better words to describe you. You always have these very, great statements, and so I got to live up to that,
So, hey, first of all, I'll take lovely. I'll take that any day. So thank you, Cullen. And it's not a competition, man. It's not a competition. Look, I never intended to get you in a place where you felt like you had to compete.
We only do that with our movie choices, really.
Yeah. And hey, maybe you'll have your own thing, right? Like with your introductions, you're going to come up with your own, maybe you can have a catchphrase or something,
Mm-hmm. Well, my thing at the moment is having to redo them 3 or 4 times, so that'll be my specialty for introductions.
This is our first take on this one, so I feel
True.
And I feel like it's turned into a keeper, Cullen.
Yeah.
I feel like we're not going to have to go back and do a second take on this.
I haven't flubbed yet, so
how about this? Maybe your thing could be that you you come up with a catchphrase for like each introduction, and then we could vote on which catchphrase that we like best, and then
so some audience interaction,
and then you could be like an 80s movie character, right? You've got your own catchphrase. I mean, that's I almost feel like I want to do that. I now that I say this more, I want a catchphrase.
We can have people calling in, have a call-in line, and it's like public access television. It'd be perfect.
I love it. Anyway, I'll take lovely, Colin. Thank you.
We are, both of us, talking today about one of my favorite films, probably a bit of a departure from our usual fare.
Definitely.
Koyaanisqatsi, which is I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people had heard of this, but also wouldn't put it past people to have not heard of it.
Right.
But it's the 1982 experimental film by Godfrey Reggio, with a really famous Philip Glass score.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that you might if you haven't necessarily heard the name, you've probably seen clips from it somewhere, because it's quite impactful and had quite a large, kind of, for lack of a better term, impact on the artistic experimental world of filmmaking, and lots of kind of invented a lot of new norms that a lot of films have taken from that.
Critics around the world have called it a remarkable film event, a breathtaking experience, a fusion of image and sound. Until now, you've never really seen the world you live in.
I mean, I think, especially for a film of this type, I mean, you don't usually see such a wide acceptance, right? Or
Yes,
such,
yeah,
or a film like this have such a large audience. And I think that's, um, uh, that just kind of speaks to how unique I think it was when it was first released in '82. But also, of course, I mean, Philip Glass, his popularity has soared since then. This is one
hmm
of his first works, especially for film.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think a lot of people might have been exposed to this film or made aware of it just being interested in Philip Glass, and then maybe you kind of work backwards, and you find your way to this film. So maybe a lot
exactly,
of
yeah.
people are kind of introduced to it knowing the soundtrack or the score first, and then they kind of back into the film, so to speak.
Well, that's kind of a perfect segue into talking about our first experiences with the movie because
Uh
that's
huh.
exactly how I found it.
Okay.
I back in it's funny because it's like a really bizarre way to find this movie, but um, when I think I was in grade 8 and I was playing Grand Theft Auto 4 and
Okay, I know where you're going. Yep.
the Pruitt Ego soundtrack
Uh
from
huh.
this movie, that one track, is in like on the radio for
Mm-hmm.
Grand Theft Auto 4 for some reason. I have no idea why they put Philip Glass on the Grand Theft Auto radio station, but it's in there. And I always loved it. Like every time it would come on, I would be like, "Oh, I'm keeping." I would, drive slower to the mission so I could hear it for longer because I just really liked that score.
That's
And
awesome.
it was
Yeah.
also one of those times when it was like it wasn't necessarily as obvious to me back then that you could just look up stuff on the internet and find out why like what a song was in a game. Like it wasn't that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was
What
easily
year would
accessible,
this
but
have
it just
been?
wasn't. This
What
would have
year would?
been I don't know, probably 2006, 2007 ish.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Um, and so yeah, it was or when did it would have been whenever whatever the year Grand Theft Auto 4 came out, whatever that was. I think it was
I
'07 or something.
I've got no
Um,
idea. Oh, it sounds right.
and but yeah, and so then I remember just like that was the thing, and I also didn't quite. I don't think I quite understood that it wasn't even from something else. Like I think I thought it was might have just been the soundtrack for the game.
Yeah.
And so I would just like sometimes I would just listen to it over. Like I would just go to that radio station and wait for it, and just like sit in the car and drive around the map just to hear that song. And then it wasn't until I don't know. I think it was just kind of like a eureka moment that I was like, oh, I should just look up the radio stations and maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
like a song list for the radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at first I went through like digging through the actual score of the game and didn't find anything, and I was like driven mad. And then I went to the radio stations and then was going through it and going through it and going through it and found the Prudigo Philip Glass score, and I listened to it again and again and again. At that point, now I had it at my fingertips and I could listen to it whenever I wanted.
Mm.
And then it probably was about, I don't know. I remember I do have a very vivid memory of going and watching the scene of the collapsing and destruction of the buildings, and thinking that it was cool. But it was probably until about a year later that I actually saw the movie at Blockbuster and
Wow,
was
they had
like,
it at Blockbuster.
yeah, no, surprisingly, yeah, it was in there, and because I remember it catching my attention because of the title, and then I was like, I know that name,
Hmm.
and then I think I either looked at the back of the cover or something and read Philip Glass' name. I can't remember exactly how I made the connection, but I was like, oh yeah, this is the one that I have
Right.
seen uh, on YouTube, like in that clip, and so I brought it home and I watched it, and surprisingly, like
Now
even
this is on DVD, right?
yeah, this DVD, yeah.
Okay, DVD.
Um,
And did you what? Like, I'm just curious. Like, at this point, did you have CRT? Did you have
No, it was a really, really early, I
like
think plasma
plasma?
screen.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
I think it was a
Yep.
really, really early, when they were super expensive and
Yeah.
flat screen and looked like they were, like built by a tank or something.
Yep.
But yeah, and so I watched the movie, and I even at that young age, I remember being like really kind of hypnotized by it,
Mm.
and watching it now, I'm surprised that I was able to honestly get through it. Not that it's necessarily long, but it's a movie without narration, with
Well,
no
it's
real story, with
it.
no
Yeah, it's not a film.
performances. So
It's not a film that you would expect, a middle schooler to be interested in. That's for sure,
but I
right?
think a big part of that too is the power of Philip Glass's score in this, and
Mm-hmm.
not to take away from the rest of the filmmaking because I think it's all really fantastic here. But I think at that time, I think what brought me in was the Philip Glass score.
Yeah.
I think I just really, really liked the sound of it, and so it just sort of became, in a way, to me, like a big music video for
Yeah.
that score. And then I don't think I watched it again. Of course, it was rented, and back then, I mean, with a video store, you would rarely, at least I would rarely rent things twice, just because you get two movies to pick out every
Yeah.
weekend or something, and
Right.
you
Right.
don't want to waste your chance by watching something you've seen before. So usually I would go to different things, and I also think that it wasn't something that necessarily like stayed in my mind as, again,
Yeah.
because there's just no plot. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I love the characters in
Right.
Koyaanisqatsi. So I don't think I saw it again until probably either my last year of high school or like my first year that I'd graduated from high school, and I rewatched it and still really loved it, but I think got, of course, more out of it at that point, and found myself actually kind of engaging with what Reggio was trying to do a little bit more than
Mm-hmm.
when I was in grade 8, or grade 7, or whenever, however old I was. But yeah, and so it's also a movie that I think, and we're gonna get into this a little bit more later, because I want to talk about like the impact that it's had on me. But I do
Yeah.
want to say, just as perhaps a little teaser for that conversation, it's really, I think, one of the key things about seeing this movie so young was that it was like a really weird eye opener that this is kind of a place that cinema could go.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I didn't fully understand it and I couldn't necessarily put it to words at that point, I think that seeing a movie like this really helped me kind of realize that you can be experimental, and
Mm-hmm.
you can change things up, and you don't necessarily have to follow dogmatically the rules of filmmaking. And I think that that's also, it's funny because I think as time has gone on too, like I've seen myself kind of subconsciously being influenced by this movie a lot,
Mm.
where I might not necessarily be pulling something directly out of it, but I frequently kind of go to a place that I think this film, sort of like that kind of ecosystem this film exists in, where it's like the power of images in a raw form
Yeah.
paired with audio, and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily trying to tell an explicit story with those images, but using just the impact of the visual paired with the audio. What does that do for you? And so I think that kind of sort of has impacted me greatly through my life. But we'll get into more of that
Yeah,
later.
we'll get into more of that
I'd
because
love to hear kind of
I want to put a
your
pin.
take too.
I want to put a pin in you, just real quick. I want to say it out loud so I don't forget later. And I
Hmm.
get into my first experiences. You said kind of, images and sounds, not an explicit narrative. I mean, and maybe it's just in the semantics, but I think there definitely is an explicit narrative. But let's talk about that.
Yes.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
that. And the power of the juxtaposition of images, which is editing, which is cinema.
Hmm.
So let's talk about that. Okay, yeah. So first experiences. So okay, I feel a bit ashamed to say that I have not seen this film before now. I was aware of it just peripherally. I had like a Philip Glass era as well when I was not as young as you, but probably like I want to say maybe I don't know early 2000s or so. Um, and so I definitely remember listening to this music, but for whatever reason, I didn't seek out the film, or maybe I did and I couldn't find it. I don't know. But in preparation for this episode, it's the first time I'd seen the film. And I got to even admit, there was a little part of me, right? So you pick the film, and there's part of me that's like, oh, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Holy crap, I forgot about that film. Awesome. I've got a great excuse now to go out, buy it, and watch it.
Hmm.
Another part of me, like and I remember kind of, as I was winding down my day, as I generally like do these screenings in the evening, in preparation for the show, I was kind of like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I was kind of
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
okay, this is, how long is this again? Oh, okay. It's like basically an hour and a half or so. Okay, there's no narrative. Oh man, am I going to be able to stay awake for this? That was almost, I mean, I have to admit, right? If I'm just like perfectly honest,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I'm like, okay, this is really going to be kind of an exercise in like
Endurance.
really, well, or just like really, after a long day, it's
Hmm.
like I've been doing taxes all day. Yay for that. And I was just like kind of worried, am I going to have the mental, like the ability to kind of maintain focus, right? Because this is going to require some work on my part, right? It's non-narrative, it's experimental, it's just this, images. Because I knew what it was going to be, right? I
Yeah,
obviously I'd
yeah.
heard about the film and read about the film, so it's like I didn't, I fully understood, or at least I thought I did. But I have to say, so I've got the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, so I pop in the disc and start it, and I have to say I was pretty surprised how almost immediately I was pretty drawn in,
Hmm.
and I was really surprised by how fast the film went by. I mean, a huge part, right? It's like, and you mentioned how integral Philip Glass's score is, and we'll talk about this a little more. But I mean, it's they really did an extraordinary job of. I mean, you even use the word like music video. I mean, that's not a bad description in a certain sense. I mean, this was in '82. We have music videos kind of moving into the mainstream right at
Hmm.
this time.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, you have music television, MTV. And so the juxtaposition of like music and video or motion pictures, moving pictures, I think was really like coming into a new phase, like right about this time, right? You've even got shows like Miami Vice that are using like full blown songs, like in the middle of a primetime television show. I mean,
Hmm.
there's
Into
a
the
lot of
Air
stuff.
Tonight.
Yeah, there's
Classic
a
moment.
classic moment, man. A lot of stuff going on there in this era. Um, but no, I mean, I really enjoyed the viewing. I thought that even now in 2024, all these years later, and here's one of the biggest things I thought. So I'm watching it, and it's when we start off, and there's a lot of landscapes, natural landscapes at first, and clouds, and then we kind of move into a moment where there's more and more we're in urban landscapes and cars and people in large buildings or like public transit and stuff like that, places where we see it's like people are almost like ants. And then we even move into like more technology, comparing cityscapes to circuitry, circuit
Hmm.
boards, and processors, and just anybody who's been up in an airplane and looked down on a city, and you kind of have an idea of what a circuit board looks like. You've thought this a million times, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
interesting. Um, but in all of this, there's a couple. I mean, I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I was impressed by how impactful this imagery can still be after all these years. And I had this thought too. It's almost like not too long ago I went to go see Dune 2, in the
Hmm.
theater. And I had this thought that it was like after all these years, a real landscape shot really well is still so much more impactful, at least to me, than so much of the CGI stuff. I don't want to turn this into a CGI thing, but that's just that was like and I really began to think about how so much more interesting reality shot well, but like shifted in time, shifted in perspective, so that it forces me to see something that's in my world that I take for granted, but it forces me to see it anew,
Hmm.
is somehow more impactful to me than like a fabricated thing that I know is totally fake. I don't know, and maybe there's something to explore there. And I'm not saying that
Well, I mean, that's
CGI
what
is.
the poster says. Until now, you've never really seen the world you live in. So,
Yeah,
I think that's a totally, yeah.
and again, I mean, it's not like I'm bashing CGI or special effects at all. I mean, I don't bash matte paintings. I mean,
Hmm.
so it's but I guess it's just kind of the understanding, like in your mind, either subconsciously or consciously, you're like, no, this is real. This is a thing that exists. This is in the world that I live in. But holy crap, it's like because I'm seeing it whether in a perspective shift or in a time shift or in a combination of those two things, that it's almost like looking at it through the eyes of like an alien that just landed on this planet, or a baby that like just woke up,
Well, that's something that I also wanted to definitely put like a point in to talk about because
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about Herzog
Yeah.
while watching this
Yep.
and like Landscape of the Soul, but also in his film Darkness, the one about the Kuwait oil fields, Lessons in Darkness, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
he explicitly describes having the
Yes, that's
process of
it.
making that movie about being like if an alien came to Earth and saw
Yep.
that happening, how would they? And
Right.
that's kind of what I think one thing that really fascinates me about this movie is that it's not it's not like cynically saying, look at how obsessed with technology we are and look at how
Hmm.
dependent on technology we are and look at it's like it's simply just an exploration of the modern world that we've built. And I think that that's
Mm.
another thing too about its like longevity as well, is that the technology sure is different now and then, and there's an argument perhaps to be made that we're even more dependent and interspersed with technology this day and age than we were back in 1982.
Yeah.
Almost certainly so.
Yeah.
But I think that the the point of view and the like expression that they're making with this is so poignant and so artful that it works. Like there's no point when you're like, oh, that's so funny, that's so antiquated. Like look at what
Mm.
they thought. Like it still is very, very applicable to everything today. You could,
Yeah.
you could show this in a theater today and it would have, I think, an almost identical impact. Although Reggio has said things about that, which we can also talk about a little bit. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so I think that it's really interesting. I mean, I also think that the way that the film opens. I mean, this is another place where I said earlier that I have kind of accidentally stolen from this movie before, but the movie opens with like very raw nature, like it's just
Hmm.
these rock formations, and then it slowly gets into kind of the power of nature with water flows and waterfalls and rivers, and then it
Hmm.
gets into us harnessing that power with
Hmm.
dams and hydroelectric power, and then it
Yeah.
gets into what that
Shaping the
power is
earth and like,
actually
and we're
sending
like,
to, right?
yeah.
And flight and cars and cities and all this stuff, and so it
Yeah.
actually does have this kind of trajectory that makes sense. And I like, for example, when I was in Iceland 5 or 6 years ago, I shot a short film there, and basically, just shot a bunch of footage and then kind of figured out the short film in the edit afterwards. And one of the things that I did was I started at this geyser, and then I followed this trickle of water from the geyser, and then that trickle of water turned into a stream, and then that stream turned into a larger river, and that river turned into a larger waterfall, and then an even larger waterfall until we're at the ocean. And it was kind of this visual trajectory of like an event or a story of just a very inanimate or
Yeah.
natural process.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot because it does give you totally connection. And I think that earlier when you had kind of mentioned the thing about this movie does actually have a very you know exact narrative in a way. I agree. I think that like the word that I should have probably used there was like a scripted narrative, in a sense
Hmm.
of like it's necessary. It's not, to me. It's not trying to tell a falsified story or an embellished story. It's more displaying
Yeah.
these
Well, I
these
think
stories and these, yeah.
yeah, it's not didactic in its approach to its
Hmm.
message. I think that's, at least that's kind of how I would
And
see it.
even in
Or
a documentarian sense, like it's not even, I think, doing anything to manipulate. I mean, obviously there's technical manipulation on the images with the fast motion, the high speed and the slow motion,
well,
things like that.
let's
But
talk about that. I mean, I think it's, manipulative is not a bad word.
hmm. Oh
Especially
yeah,
like we're talking about
especially in the
art.
context of Herzog.
Yeah, we're talking about art. We're not talking about, in personal relationships or something like that, right? We're talking about art. Manipulation is not is exactly what you're here to do, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, and it's kind of like, that's, you're not a fly on the wall. You're not just sitting a camera somewhere and paying no attention to what's being recorded. That's ridiculous. This is extremely well thought out. I mean, they were meticulous in choosing what they shot and how they shot it, and then they were meticulous in how they constructed the edit
Hmm.
and how they integrated the music with that. It's extremely meticulous. And it's very manipulative. I mean, but again, not in a bad way. I mean, that's the point. I felt a very strong sense of narrative in this film. Now, I mean, you could argue, well, that's happening in your mind. Well, of course, art is an interaction between the art that the artist has created and the audience that's viewing it or listening to it.
Hmm.
Of course, that's with every art form in existence. That it's a dance between the audience and the art. Um, so of course that's the case here. But and people will come away with different interpretations. But I have a sneaky suspicion that you're going to see some pretty strong trends. If you had 1,000 people watch this, my hunch is that you would see some pretty consistent themes, emerge. I mean, it's what people got out of it or how they felt
Yes.
with this
Yeah.
film. Obviously there's going to be some deviation, and of course there's going to be people will put different value judgments on that, right? They will agree or not agree, or but I think you'll see some commonalities. And so I mean, it's so interesting. I think this is such a great example of the power of the juxtaposition of images, and you string that together, right? And even without no characters, quote unquote characters, without no dialogue, there's no exposition, there's no first, second, third act, there's in the traditional sense that we think of, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there kind of is, interestingly, some acts, but I think it's just it speaks to the power of the medium, and the power of editing. But it also kind of, that we are storytelling machines too, and that we're going to turn anything that we see or hear into a story in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Of course. Yeah.
and so, but so it's fascinating in that sense that it's we've kind of stripped a lot of the elements out of this film that you find so prevalent in modern film and story and television, especially, which is talking head, talking head, talking head, talking head, talking head. There's none of that here. And you see how powerful the medium is without that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the thing, is it's a very, I hesitate to use the word pure because I think that can be a pretty loaded word, but it's a very,
Sure.
it's a very stripped down, like you said,
Distilled.
look at the kind of language of cinema, like what
Mhm.
in its rawest form, in its most basic form, in a way.
I mean, it's interesting because I think like what you don't see, right? If like let's expand on that just a little bit or delve into it. I mean, what we don't see, you don't see. There's many of the grammatical tools of cinema are kind of left alone here. We don't really have we don't have much camera movement at all. We don't have really any kind of subjective camera, right? We stay pretty objective here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it even within the bare bones of cinema, we have a stripping away of a lot of the grammar that's been assembled over the 100+ years of the medium. Um, so we really just have images,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just really just images.
Well, I
Um,
think what also kind of fascinates me too is that there's this conversation always about how, you know, in a way, cinematography, in that how you shoot something, and editing, in that how you cut those images together, are the only two kind of things that cinema itself invented, and that
mhm,
everything else is kind of borrowed from it. Like acting comes from theater,
sure.
writing
Music
comes from,
been around for
exactly.
yeah,
So there's,
yeah.
and I think one thing that is fascinating to me about this, and I think one of the reasons that I think it's such a neat film, is because I'm willing to take Godfrey Reggio at his word in that they did not stage anything here in the movie, is
Hmm.
what they say, that everything that they shot was real, was like, they didn't ask people to do anything, they didn't tell any
Well,
extras to move a certain
I
way,
think
or
there's at least one or two shots that are manipulated, if I'm not mistaken, like the moon. I
yes,
mean,
on the
this is
building.
minimal.
Yeah,
I mean, this is
that's a
minimal,
composite.
but
Yeah.
there is at least one composite shot. So
Yeah.
there's some special effects, but
But even in that, I mean, what I think is fascinating about that is, what you're now doing is you're limiting your tool set to
yeah,
only those two things, in
it's
how
like a
you shoot
haiku.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. In how you shoot something and how you edit it. And so I think that that's really neat, because I mean, that also, like, the movie that I'm working on right now is kind of in that same vein, where it's very much, completely shot of just real, unadulterated things, and
Hmm.
then without a script, and then using the editing process to turn that into something that actually means something, and to give it meaning. And I think that that's kind of the big thing about this, is that you're giving these images meaning, which is a very, very fundamental kind of thing to cinema, which is, like, we all know that story about, okay, if you have a man's face, and then you cut from the man's face to
Hmm.
a tombstone, then he's mourning. If you cut to a man's face and a plate of food, he's hungry.
Yeah.
And like these, like you said, the juxtaposition of images and things like that. And here you're basically looking at a film that is entirely made up of that very, very simple process.
Right.
Um, and not only that, but again, exploring this whole, I mean, when we talk about interpretation, even Reggio has talked about the idea that he made this with his own interpretation, but that he really, like, he's kind of hesitated to talk about it because he thinks it's a neat idea and a neat experiment to have people kind of come away
Well,
with their own interpretations. And I think, like you said, I think that there's a pretty, you'd probably have a trend. You'd probably have like very few outliers in what they think the movie's about. But at the same time, I think that there's
but it's the fact that you came to it yourself. I think that's
well,
what's
yeah,
important. And
yeah.
and I think, I mean, sorry, I just want to,
No,
but
no,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
I get a sense. I mean, right, because I think in what like little bit of interviews or speaking from the director Reggio that I've listened to. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, we haven't talked much about his background at all, and not that we need to go into it a ton, but I find it fascinating for myself that he was basically a monk early in
Yeah.
his life, and that he spent the first 14 or some odd years, or he spent 14 years kind of um, I don't know if like full solitude, but kind of removed from culture and society a bit.
hmm
And I find that fascinating because one of the other thoughts that I had about this film, I just want to interject this really quickly. Um, I don't know. When I hear him speak, I get a sense that he's hesitant to speak specifically about what he might be saying in the film because I think he recognizes the importance of coming to it on your own, like through your
Yeah.
own kind of meditation, so to speak, right? Which this film is kind of puts you in almost like a trance-like kind of meditative state, which I think is interesting. And then I just wanted to add personal experience. One of the things that came to my mind that's kind of tangentially tied to this is that I've done a couple of these, like what they call like these 10-day meditation retreats, and where they're silent retreats, right? And you basically spend 10 days doing nothing but meditating. Like there's no books, phones, TV, radio. I mean, you're not talking, nobody else is talking. You're like totally stripped of the stimulus bombardment that we're normally exposed to in our daily life, right? And so you do this for 10 days, and then 10 days are up and you are in your car and you're driving home after having like such limited stimulus for 10 days. And I'm telling you, this film in many ways totally replicated the feeling of re-entering into society
hmm
after
Yeah.
you've been just 10 days, not even 14 years, but 10 days.
Yeah.
And I am curious, about, I wonder if that 14 years he spent in kind of solitude and meditation gave him a unique perspective that he's, whether consciously or not, kind of replicating in some of this film, where
hmm
it's just because you've stepped outside it for a bit, and once you've stepped outside it, you can kind of see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's a really good point that I want to respond to is because that's I find that this movie also feels in a way exactly what you're talking about, um, like we kind of said earlier, like an outside observer,
mhm.
like not someone that's necessarily in this world or connected to this world, but is observing it. And I think that that's really, really interesting. And I've had similar experiences. I've never done necessarily like a retreat like that, but when I was in Thailand, I was on an island at one point when I was shooting the movie, and there was no cell service, no Wi-Fi. You had generated power about an hour and a half every evening. So
Mm.
you couldn't even like you didn't want to if you had a book saved on my phone or something, I didn't want to use my phone just in case, I
Yeah.
needed it for something else because you had no power. Um, and I was there for about 6 or 7 days, and just completely surrounded by nature. This island had no roads. There were only about 10 or 20 locals living on the island. There was no other tourists. It was just me and my friend. Um, and it's huge, this huge like jungle island, and I remember feeling the exact same thing. Like when I came back, you get this small boat at the end of our stay comes and picks you up at this dock and brings you back to the mainland,
Yeah.
and this sudden like bombardment of but in this weird way, I don't know, I'm sure it's different for everyone, but like I felt kind of prepared to deal with it in this sense, like where I
Mm.
like could come out with a new kind of clarity as to how I could interact with
Mm-hmm.
this insanely hectic kind of world that we've built around ourselves. I mean, that's the movie's title means life out of balance or life in
Mm-hmm.
chaos, or so it definitely I think lines up with that.
Yeah.
And then in terms of interpretation too, um, I think what fascinates me about the movie as well in terms of interpretation is that you could have there's things that are quite concrete in the movie. And so the movie is of course about our relationship with technology, and I think Reggio even goes even further into say that it's not about our relationship with technology, it's about us living in technology and living
Mm.
within it and kind of
Mm-hmm.
and like being a part of technology. Um, but I think that you could have people also applying a lot of their own context to it and their own personal meaning. And whether
Sure.
that would be like, I think that if you had two people from the opposite sides of the political spectrum, they would likely have entirely different
Yeah.
kind of, you know, they would talk about totally different things as to why something's shot a certain way or why it isn't or what it's representing and what it's
Mm-hmm.
trying to say. Religion, I'm sure, would be another aspect that probably would drive people into a different kind of camp in terms of like what it is. And so I think, I don't think that that's
Which is no
bad at
different than
all. I
any
think
film,
that
right?
that's yeah. I think
No
that
different.
that's Oh, exactly. It's no, and but I think it's very, very explicit here. It's more. I think it's so explicit that it almost makes people have that conversation with themselves in a
Mm.
real way versus perhaps a more inconspicuous subconscious kind of way. Um, and like I like for example, I see this film as um, not a condemnation of our relationship with technology, but rather a not even necessarily a cautionary tale, but sort of just heightening the reality of the double-edged sword that technology is. Looking at
Mm.
the Pruitt sequence where the buildings are destroyed, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
feels like a very real look at like this is where things can go wrong. The film ends
As
on a shot of
yeah.
a rocket blowing up,
Yeah.
and so, but it's not. It's never painting those things as like, oh, in kind of a Luddite way where it's like we've got to go back, we've got to abandon technology, and it's more saying like this is where we are, and here's a map of kind of what humanity is doing at this time. At least that's kind
Or
of how
like,
I look at the movie.
or one way to look. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's objectiveness, and it's not entirely objective, of course, right? Because again,
Hmm.
we know that these are humans who have selected specific things to shoot. They made choices about that. They made
Yeah,
choices about how to shoot it. They made choices about how to edit it, and of course, the music
has tone. Yeah,
has a narrative of its own along with the images, right? I
yeah,
mean, the music
yeah.
is sometimes more somber or more disorienting or more upbeat or more, so it does provide a certain narrative. It has something to say about the images that, that it's juxtaposed with. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely more room for your interpretation here. I just want to, one of the things that really struck me too, just to kind of change the subject just a hair, and something I think if you're an aspiring filmmaker or or you're just interested in cinema, this is a really great film to watch because I think it can illustrate um, the power of a couple of those fundamental aspects of cinema which are unique to it, which is and how this film plays with perspective. So basically, like where you're putting the camera, right? So how do we see things? And this film does such a great job, and I think especially in '82 there would have been some perspectives that the camera puts people in
Hmm.
that just would have been really new, just new to
Yeah,
people. There's
yeah.
so much aerial photography long before now. Drone shots, every like, I mean, student films have like,
Everyone's
drone
got the
shots
overhead of
now.
them walking down the road or something.
Right. I mean, it's in like real estate photography now,
Hmm.
huge drone shot aerial photography. So, but I think it would have been a much newer phenomenon in '82, especially with how well it's done here. Um, just the landscapes that would have been that so many people you wouldn't have seen otherwise, and the
Hmm.
perspectives that you get to see it, but also, and it's really, and this of course just speaks to the power of editing, is that time manipulation, and we see time manipulation here. I think is very unique to cinema, and there's something about cinema and time that I think is so compelling that you can compress time, you can dilate time, you
Hmm.
can go backwards in time, and cinema really is kind of the closest that we've ever got to time travel, basically, if you think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there's something like really profoundly impactful to me about that aspect of cinema, that it's really the closest thing we've gotten to time manipulation and time travel, both in the story but in the world, where we can see people who've passed, we can hear them, we can watch them move, they come back to life
Hmm.
in cinema. And that's just that's a really compelling thing to me. um but I think this film does a really great job illustrating the power of those. Sometimes I think we take it for granted because we're kind of, I mean, every cinema is one of the most popular mediums of all time. I mean, everybody's been exposed to, gosh, hundreds, if not thousands of films in their life, right? It's like we
Hmm.
just take it for granted. But I think when we strip it down to kind of the bare bones, like we've talked about in this film, it really reminded me of the power of perspective and time as tools uniquely of cinema.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I think that it's also, I think that Reggio, as far as I'm aware, was quite involved with the like with Philip Glass's score in terms of
Well,
the tonality of the.
and vice versa. I think Philip
Yes, and
Glass
yeah.
was involved with where that music. I mean, I think they worked together
Yes, yeah,
very, very closely, as I
and they
understand
almost
it.
constantly,
Yeah,
there's if there's an interview or talk about this movie, it's almost always the two of them,
yeah, yep,
and watching them discuss the film clearly has a very collaborative,
yeah, yeah.
angle to it. And but I think it's interesting too, because I think the one of the things at the beginning of one of their talks that they do, um, Reggio mentions that Ron Frick, the I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the cinematographer, suggested Gershwin as the score.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I think that that's funny because I think of like how different the movie would have been if it was
Yeah.
more of a, like, I imagine, like, I mean, my mind immediately goes to something that's kind of like frontiersman, or like the technological frontier of America, in that sense, where
Mm,
it's like very
mm,
specific to time and very specific to um, location, and
mm,
whereas I think the genius of going with something like Philip Glass is just the timelessness of his music, and
mm,
how it feels like this score could have come out of any era, um, and still work with it. And I think it's a testament to his skill too, that you can have this music work over shots of, again, those like rock formations in the desert and sand dunes, and work over shots of 747s taking off and highways and
yeah.
all this stuff. And so I think that there's a really, really um, powerful link between those two things. And I'm sure that's become obvious because we've mentioned Glass so much in this, but um, I do, I can't really stress enough how I think vital. I mean, so vital to the point that that's why I found the movie. And like you said at the beginning, I'm sure a lot of people have found this movie through the
Yeah.
score.
No, it's key.
Um,
It's key. It's absolutely key. And Philip Glass, and I don't know if I have the words, kind of as a non-musician to articulate this, but there's something about, the cyclical building but repetitive nature of Philip Glass's score
mhm,
that that works uniquely with these images where and again, I'm not a musician, and I'm not sure that I'll be able to articulate it here, but there's something about the repetitiveness, but then a small change, and then kind of, it's almost like his music is almost like a fractal in a certain
mhm,
sense, and then we
mhm,
go into that small change, and then that forms a new pattern, and then we so it's I and maybe patterns is almost what I'm kind of thinking about. There's these musical patterns that seem to just really harmonize with the visual patterns of movement. It's kind of when you really, it kind of almost puts you in a trance, and when you're really paying attention to the film, and you're kind of, your eye can go anywhere right in the frame. I mean, that's the other thing, is that this, again, it's a very objective camera. there's they aren't really doing a lot to show you like where should you be looking, which of course
Hmm.
is something that most cinema focuses on quite a bit, right? You have very specifically lit scenes. It's like, look here, this is where the important thing is, look here. You
Yeah,
know, I
yeah.
mean, that's a huge part
It's the
of
opposite of the Hitchcock playing the audience like a piano, and using
right.
every element to point the audience in a direction.
Right. And so we're free to look everywhere. Everything in the frame has equal weight by and large. And so then it's like this movement becomes, it's like you're finding patterns, and then you see something, oh, there's one person who's not going down the escalator. Why, what's going on there? There's like a something jumps up out of the pattern and catches your attention. And I think the music is doing that as well. Something jumps up out of the pattern that
Hmm.
Glass has created with the music. And so it feels like these something's bubbling up out of the visual and out of the music, and they both reinforce each other. I hope I've made any sense with that
No, yeah,
articulation.
that makes perfect sense. Yeah, where like there's definitely. I mean, the one thing I love about Philip Glass in general too is just that I find that he's the kind of like master at having a song that could be 20 minutes long and feel like it's constantly building and building and building, and yet somehow at every turn it becomes even bigger and more
Hmm.
grand, and you're
That's
like,
what I
well,
mean.
where the
It's like
hell,
a
like, yeah,
fractal. It's
yeah.
almost like there's a pattern and a change, and then we go
Hmm.
into the change, and we have a new pattern, and then there's so it's you're constantly, and every time you're like, oh, okay, it can't. Where do we go?
Hmm.
It's like a fractal. It just expands into itself again.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
And
I
I
you
think
know,
I think the other thing too that I like wanted to discuss too about the movie is, I talked a little bit about the impact it's had on me, but I think the impact it's had on like culture, filmmaking, and
mm,
it kind of has, in a way, it almost invented its own kind of like subgenre of art film and documentary film of this. Like, I'm not certain. I probably could do a little bit more research on this, but I believe it's kind of the first movie that ever did the whole like watching people walk through a train station in super fast motion,
mm,
and seeing that kind of ballet of like city life and
mm-hmm,
cars, how they interweave with each other on the freeway and things like that.
mm-hmm.
Um and now that's something that's everywhere. Like, you see that in
Oh, you see this
advertising.
in
Like, you see
yeah.
this everywhere.
And you see this in like even in like establishing shots. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
there were some shots here that I feel, it's like I remember in like, it could be even like as mainstream as like, uh what some 80s film like Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox, these like super low angle, clouds reflecting in the glass building shots. I feel like
Hmm.
those are like establishing shots. They were everywhere for a while. And
Hmm.
you're right, the time lapse stuff, they would just be even as like establishing shots real quick, or you know in whatever like
The sun going down or something, and
studio
yeah,
film. Yeah, like, oh
yeah.
crap, we got to get something to kind of connect these scenes, or we need to show that some time, boom boom boom. you
Well, and
know
I think that's the thing too, is that there's one of those talks that Reggio talks about with Philip Glass. He talks about how Ron Frick called him from LA and was like, there's this really good time lapse footage that I think you should look at, because I think we could do something in this style. And so he went, and Reggio tells it that he was so excited that he flew to Los Angeles that night and to watch like print of this footage. And he said it was again one of those like eureka moments for him, because he realized that this was such a like an untapped technique, that beforehand this had been used to show the passing of a day with the sun going overhead,
mm-hmm.
or a flower blooming or something, and it was almost purely scientific in that sense, where it
Yeah.
was just about observation of a long period of time, and but to use it and apply it to something that makes us kind of look inward, in that you have this kind of sense of like, oh my god, we are really this kind of river of
Mm-hmm.
things that are moving
River of humanity.
so interconnectedly. And like, we always talk about how impressed we are with ant colonies and how interconnected they seem by like oh wow, like they're so good at, getting in line and going into the
Yeah.
anthill and stuff like that. And I don't mean to say this like we're insects in a disparaging way, but I think it makes you look at like when you see it that quickly and you see it going that fast, it's like, dang, it's a miracle that we don't like all bump into each other and, get injured constantly when we're walking anywhere, because it really does. It reminds me honestly of 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the Blue Danube sequence, when the
Docking
ship is
sequence.
docking,
Yeah.
and it's, Kubrick presents that like a ballet,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this juxtaposition of this very technical, highly technical process being mixed with this beautiful ballet music. But it works so well because ballet is such a technical craft, and there's so much technique going on that is hidden beneath the beauty of what it looks like.
Yeah.
And this always reminds me of that, where like when you see the overhead of intersections and the cars flying through the intersections, and it's like this dance of the life just going on and on and on and on, and
Yeah.
time marching forward as we just kind of all interact without any real idea of how dependent on one of these things could go wrong, and suddenly these things come crashing down. But not even in a cynical way, more in a like, how interesting is it, how fragile all this is,
Yeah.
and yet we're able to get through it, and we're able to exist in the way that we do. And so I think that that's really, really interesting. And I think that you can see a lot of, just to get back to the point I was making about like impact on other movies, you can see a lot of movies that even documentaries that kind of take this style and try and either build on it or adapt it into their own thing. And I think one thing that is often missing is that lack of cynicism. I think a lot of times people will now use this kind of like an overhead shot of a busy intersection or something to be like, look at how meaningless and mindless we all are going about our. And I don't think this film has any of that. Like I don't think that this movie is looking at human beings like they're insects.
No.
Perhaps in a very literal sense of being high up and looking down on tiny things, but I don't think that it's saying that we're like mindless drones at all. In fact, I think quite the opposite. I think it's saying that we are pretty capable of so much, and that we're really a part of nature in such a, I think, a really profound way.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's one thing that I always find kind of irks me about movies that try to grab this style, which is that they kind of take the style and apply, I think, not that there's anything wrong with being negative, but it's cynicism to it. And I think that that's one thing that always sticks out at me about.
Well, that could be we could do a whole episode on how like postmodernism and postmodernism
Yes, yeah.
and cynicism pervades cinema today, both on the screen and behind the scenes. That could be a whole series of episodes. Even,
yes,
I think.
yeah. The soldiers of cynical cinema.
Oh my gosh. I think unless you've got anything else like really specific, I think that's a great note to end on.
No, yeah, I think that's.
I think thank you so much for providing the catalyst for me to finally see this film. Because who knows when I would have found it had it not been for this. And I'm really glad that I did. And now that I've got the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, I'm going to watch the other two films in this trilogy. I'll be curious to see how the director, or if the director kind of changes their, how this morphs, I guess, how this idea changes from this film to the second to the third. I'm really curious to see that.
The third one is definitely the most unique of all three, but I like
no
it
spoilers.
A lot. No spoilers. No spoilers. The main character dies at the end, so.
No! You ruined it!
Yes, the guy doing the time lapse, he falls off the camera tower.
It's just a light bulb in the briefcase, people. My God. All right. Well, on that note, thanks, Cullen, for a fantastic conversation as always. Lots of food for thought, and everybody out there, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, we'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah. Bye-bye.